Have you ever watched someone slowly push away the very person they claim to love most? The tragedy unfolds like watching a car accident in slow motion, where avoidant detachment becomes their downfall, destroying relationships that could have been beautiful. These individuals master the art of emotional distance, building walls so high that even they forget what lies beyond them. They create a fortress of independence that eventually becomes their prison, leaving them isolated and wondering why love always seems to slip through their fingers like sand. The human mind plays fascinating tricks when it comes to matters of the heart. Those who struggle with avoidant attachment have trained their brains to see emotional connection as a threat rather than a gift. They develop sophisticated defense mechanisms that feel protective, but ultimately sabotage their deepest desires for companionship and understanding. The irony cuts deep. In their attempt to shield themselves from pain, they guarantee their own suffering. What makes this pattern so destructive is how it feeds on itself. Each time someone with avoidant attachment pushes away a partner, they collect evidence that relationships don't last, that people leave, that emotional investment leads to disappointment. This becomes their confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms what they already believe while ignoring evidence to the contrary. They notice every time someone doesn't text back immediately, every slight change in tone, every moment of conflict as proof that their fears were justified all along. But here's what they miss in their hypervigilant scanning for rejection: the countless small moments of care, the gentle touches, the worried glances when they come home late, the way their partner's face lights up when they walk into a room. The confirmation bias creates tunnel vision, highlighting every perceived threat while filtering out the very love they claim to want. It's like wearing sunglasses in a beautiful garden and complaining that all the flowers look dull and lifeless. Understanding this pattern isn't just academic curiosity. It's the first step toward breaking free from cycles that have likely repeated for years or even decades. The stakes couldn't be higher because relationships form the foundation of human happiness and meaning. When someone consistently sabotages their connections with others, they rob themselves of life's greatest joys and deepest satisfactions. They wake up each morning a little more isolated, a little more convinced that they're different, that they're not meant for lasting love. Yet there's hope in recognition. Once someone understands how avoidant detachment became their downfall, they can begin to make different choices. They can learn to catch themselves in the act of pushing away, to question their immediate impulse to retreat when things get emotionally intense. They can discover that vulnerability, while terrifying, is also the gateway to the very connection they've been craving all along. The journey isn't easy, but it's absolutely worth taking for anyone tired of watching love slip away time and time again. If you want to better understand someone's attachment style, see the link in the description to one of the most popular books on attachment theory. Picture someone who seems to have everything together on the surface: successful career, nice apartment, interesting hobbies, a carefully curated social media presence. But get close enough, and you'll notice something peculiar happens whenever relationships start to deepen. They begin to find flaws in their partner that weren't there before. Suddenly, the charming quirks become annoying habits. The endearing enthusiasm becomes overwhelming neediness. The loving gestures feel suffocating rather than sweet. Take someone like Beck from the Netflix series You. Though her situation was extreme, her pattern of pulling back when things got intense reflects something many people experience. She had this way of creating distance just when Joe Goldman was trying to get closer. Though granted, Joe's approach was problematic in its own right. But if you strip away the dramatic elements, you see a familiar dance, one person reaching out while the other instinctively steps back. This stepping back isn't conscious or malicious. It's an automatic response that developed over time, usually starting in childhood when emotional needs weren't consistently met. The child learns that depending on others leads to disappointment, so they develop incredible self-reliance. They become experts at handling everything alone, pride themselves on their independence, and view emotional needs as weaknesses to overcome rather than natural human experiences to embrace. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. That same independence that once protected them becomes the very thing that destroys their adult relationships. When someone they care about expresses a need for more time together, their internal alarm system activates. Warning signals flash: danger, dependency, potential loss of self. They don't consciously think these thoughts, but their body responds as if their autonomy is under attack. The cognitive bias at work here is called the availability heuristic, the tendency to judge the likelihood of future events based on how easily examples come to mind. If someone's early experiences taught them that emotional closeness leads to pain, disappointment, or loss of independence, their brain will quickly recall those memories whenever intimacy increases. The past feels more real and immediate than the present moment, coloring their perception of what's actually happening now. So when their partner says something perfectly reasonable like, "I'd love to spend more time with you this weekend," their brain doesn't hear a loving invitation. Instead, it hears echoes of past experiences, maybe a parent who demanded too much attention, a previous relationship where they felt suffocated, or childhood messages that their own needs and space didn't matter. The availability heuristic makes these old memories feel like current threats, triggering defensive responses that have nothing to do with their present partner. What happens next is perhaps the most tragic part of the entire cycle. The person begins to create evidence for why the relationship won't work. They start noticing every small incompatibility, every moment of friction, every difference in communication style. They build a case in their mind for why they're not meant to be with this person, why it's better to end things now before they get more complicated. Think about characters like Chuck Bass from Gossip Girl. Throughout the series, whenever his relationship with Blair Waldorf from Gossip Girl got too real, too emotionally demanding, he would find ways to sabotage it. He'd make cruel comments, disappear without explanation, or throw himself into work or other distractions. The pattern was so predictable that viewers could almost set their watches by it. The moment vulnerability was required, Chuck would find an escape route. But the real tragedy isn't just the relationship that ends. It's what the person tells themselves afterward. They convince themselves they made the right choice, that they were incompatible anyway, that the other person was too needy or clingy or demanding. They rarely examine their own role in creating the very problems they used to justify the breakup. This is where the confirmation bias becomes particularly destructive, as they collect this experience as further evidence that relationships don't work out, that they're better off alone. The cycle repeats with the next person and the next, each time reinforcing their belief that they're not meant for lasting partnership. They develop a reputation among friends for being afraid of commitment, for always finding something wrong just when things get serious. But what people don't see is the internal struggle, the genuine desire for connection, battling against a nervous system that interprets closeness as danger. Years pass, and the pattern becomes more entrenched. They watch friends get married, start families, build lives with partners who stick around through difficult times. They attend weddings and smile appropriately, but inside they're convinced that kind of lasting love just isn't in the cards for them. They're different, they tell themselves. They need more space, more freedom, more independence than other people. It's not that relationships don't work, it's that relationships don't work for them. But what if that story isn't true? What if the very thing they've been running from is actually what they've been searching for all along? Now let's talk about what you can actually do about this pattern if you recognize it in yourself or someone you care about. The first step might surprise you. It's not about forcing yourself into vulnerability or trying to change overnight. Instead, it starts with developing what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking. When you notice yourself starting to pull back from someone you care about, pause and ask yourself a simple question. What am I feeling right now, and where might this feeling be coming from? This isn't about judging yourself or forcing different emotions. It's about becoming curious rather than reactive. Maybe you'll notice a tightness in your chest when your partner wants to make weekend plans. Maybe you'll catch yourself feeling irritated when they text you sweet messages throughout the day. The key is to approach these observations like a detective rather than a judge. A detective gathers information without immediately drawing conclusions. They notice patterns and ask questions. Why does planning ahead feel threatening? What's uncomfortable about receiving affectionate messages? When did you first learn that emotional expressions were problematic or overwhelming? Here's what you need to understand about your nervous system. It's trying to protect you based on outdated information. It's like having a security system that's still programmed for threats that no longer exist. Your brain learned certain rules about relationships when you were young, and it's been following those rules ever since, even though your circumstances have completely changed. The second step involves what therapists call reparenting. Basically, you need to update your internal operating system with more current and accurate information. This means consciously challenging the automatic thoughts that arise when intimacy increases. When your brain says this person is being too clingy, you can respond with something like, actually, wanting to spend time together is normal and healthy in relationships. Think about how Emily Cooper from Emily in Paris handles her relationships. She often gets caught up in her own fears and misinterpretations, but she's usually willing to step back and reconsider her initial reactions. She doesn't always get it right, but she tries to stay open to different perspectives on what's happening between her and her romantic interests. You can develop that same flexibility in your own thinking. This process requires incredible patience with yourself, because you're essentially rewiring neural pathways that have been operating the same way for years or decades. Your brain will keep defaulting to the old patterns because they're familiar and feel safe. The new patterns, staying present during emotional conversations, tolerating the discomfort of uncertainty, allowing someone else's needs to matter alongside your own, will feel foreign and possibly dangerous at first. But here's something crucial to remember. Feelings aren't facts. Just because intimacy feels scary doesn't mean it actually is scary. Just because someone's expression of love feels overwhelming doesn't mean they're actually asking too much. Your emotional reactions are information, not commands. You can acknowledge them without automatically obeying them. The third step involves practicing what relationship experts call secure base behavior. Essentially, learning to be a safe haven for both yourself and your partner. This means developing the ability to stay emotionally present even when conversations get difficult, or when your partner expresses needs that trigger your independence alarms. Start small with this practice. Maybe commit to staying in the conversation for just 2 minutes longer than you normally would before suggesting a break or changing the subject. Maybe practice validating your partner's feelings even when you don't fully understand them. You might say something like, "I can see this is really important to you," or "Help me understand what you're experiencing right now." Remember that validation doesn't mean agreement. You're not saying they're right about everything or that you'll do whatever they want. You're simply acknowledging that their emotional experience matters and deserves attention. This is often revolutionary for people with avoidant attachment because they learned early that emotional expressions were burdens to be minimized or ignored. The fourth step is learning to communicate your own needs and boundaries in healthy ways rather than through withdrawal and distance. Instead of pulling back when you feel overwhelmed, practice saying things like, "I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed right now and need about 30 minutes to process before we continue this conversation." Instead of finding fault with your partner when they want more closeness, try something like, "I care about you, and I'm also feeling like I need some space today. Can we find a way for both of us to get what we need?" This kind of direct communication feels terrifying at first because it reveals your internal experience rather than hiding it. But here's what's magical about it. Most people respond positively when you're honest about your emotional needs rather than acting them out through avoidance or criticism. Your partner would much rather hear, "I need some alone time to recharge," than wonder why you've suddenly become distant and critical. Consider how Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You, despite his many problematic behaviors, at least understood the importance of paying attention to someone's actual communication rather than just their actions. While his methods were completely inappropriate, the underlying principle holds true. Relationships work better when people express their needs directly rather than expecting others to guess or interpret their behavior. The fifth step involves developing what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to experience uncomfortable emotions without immediately acting to make them stop. When intimacy increases and you feel that familiar urge to create distance, practice sitting with the discomfort for a few moments before taking action. Breathe deeply, notice the sensations in your body, and remind yourself that feelings are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to tolerate genuinely problematic behavior from others. Healthy boundaries are still important, but it does mean learning to distinguish between actual problems that need addressing and the general discomfort that comes with emotional vulnerability. Most of the time, that anxious feeling when someone gets close isn't a warning about danger. It's just your nervous system adjusting to unfamiliar territory. You can practice distress tolerance in small situations throughout your day. When a friend calls and wants to talk about their problems, notice any impulse to cut the conversation short or change the subject to something lighter. When a colleague expresses appreciation for your work, resist the urge to deflect or minimize the compliment. These minor moments of staying present during emotional exchange build your capacity for handling bigger relationship challenges. The final step is probably the most important: developing compassion for the part of you that learned to protect itself through emotional distance. That part of you wasn't wrong or broken. It was adapting to circumstances where emotional needs weren't safely met. It developed brilliant strategies for survival and self-protection. The problem isn't that these strategies exist, but that they're being applied to situations where they're no longer necessary or helpful. You can appreciate your independence and self-reliance while also making room for interdependence and mutual support. You can honor your need for space and autonomy while also staying connected to people you care about. These aren't contradictory goals, they're different aspects of a balanced, healthy approach to relationships. The journey from avoidant detachment to secure connection isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming more fully yourself, including the parts of you that long for understanding, acceptance, and genuine intimacy. Those longings were never weaknesses to overcome. They were signs of your fundamental humanity, temporarily buried under layers of protection that are no longer serving you. As we reach the end of this exploration into how avoidant detachment becomes someone's downfall, it's worth reflecting on the profound tragedy and hope that exists within this pattern. The tragedy lies in watching people systematically destroy the very relationships they most deeply crave, often without fully understanding why they keep repeating the same painful cycle. They become experts at finding reasons to leave just when staying might finally give them what they've been searching for all along. But the hope lies in recognition and choice. Once someone understands the mechanics of their own avoidant patterns, how confirmation bias makes them focus on problems while ignoring positives, how the availability heuristic makes past hurts feel like present dangers, how their nervous system mistakes intimacy for threat, they can begin to make different decisions. They can catch themselves in the act of pushing away and choose to stay present instead. The path forward requires tremendous courage because it asks someone to do the very thing that feels most dangerous, to stay emotionally open when everything inside them screams to protect and retreat. It's like asking someone who's afraid of heights to walk across a suspension bridge, except the bridge leads to everything they actually want: genuine connection, lasting partnership, the experience of being truly known and loved for who they are. Think about all the Chuck Bass and Blair Waldorf moments from Gossip Girl, where Chuck almost walked away from the best thing in his life because vulnerability felt impossible. The viewers could see what he couldn't, that his fear of being hurt was causing the very abandonment he was trying to avoid. The same dynamic plays out in real relationships every day. But unlike television characters, real people don't have writers who eventually bring them back together for a happy ending. Real people have to choose, moment by moment, whether to lean into connection or retreat into familiar isolation. This choice becomes available every single day in countless small moments. When someone you care about reaches out, you can choose to respond warmly instead of keeping your reply brief and distant. When conflict arises, you can choose to work through it together instead of using it as evidence that you're incompatible. When your partner expresses a need for more time or attention, you can choose to see it as a bid for connection rather than a threat to your independence. None of these choices will feel natural at first. Your brain will keep offering you the same old interpretations and the same old escape routes. But each time you make a different choice, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways. You're teaching your nervous system that intimacy can be safe, that conflict can be productive, that emotional needs can be met without losing yourself in the process. The people in your life who care about you aren't asking you to become someone different. They're asking you to become more fully who you already are, including the parts of yourself that you learned to hide or suppress. They want to know not just the carefully curated version of you that feels safe to share, but the whole person, your fears, your dreams, your past experiences that shaped you, your hopes for the future. Remember that changing attachment patterns isn't just about improving romantic relationships. It affects every connection in your life: friendships, family relationships, professional partnerships, even your relationship with yourself. When you learn to tolerate emotional closeness without panicking, when you develop the ability to communicate needs directly instead of through withdrawal, when you can stay present during difficult conversations, every area of your life becomes richer and more satisfying. The alternative, continuing to let avoidant detachment be your downfall, leads to a life of increasing isolation and regret. Each relationship that ends because you couldn't tolerate the vulnerability it required, each friendship that fades because you couldn't handle their emotional needs, each opportunity for deeper connection that you sabotaged out of fear, adds up to existence that feels empty despite all your achievements and independence. But here's the beautiful truth that makes this entire journey worthwhile. The very thing you've been running from, the experience of being truly seen, known, and loved, is still waiting for you. It's waiting in the relationships you have right now, in the new connections you'll form, in the conversations you haven't yet dared to have. It's waiting for you to risk staying instead of leaving, to choose curiosity instead of judgment, to trust that love might actually be the safe harbor you thought it could never be. Your attachment style isn't your destiny. It's simply the starting point for a journey toward the kind of connection that makes life worth living. Every person who has learned to love securely started somewhere else first. They had to unlearn old patterns, challenge familiar thoughts, and make different choices one moment at a time. You can do the same thing, starting right now, with the very next interaction you have with someone you care about. The question isn't whether you're capable of change. You absolutely are. The question is whether you're ready to stop letting avoidant detachment be your downfall and start letting authentic connection be your greatest triumph.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.